Look at the events you've written down. Can you see that the conclusion you reached, I'm not important, is a valid interpretation of those events? Would you say that many children the same age as you, who had the same experience as you, would have formed the same conclusion you did? Now we're going to play a little game I like to call possibilities. We'll imagine 4 friends of yours are visiting you and looking at a videotape of the events you just wrote down. Now your interpretation of those events when you were a child was, I'm not important. That is one valid interpretation of Mom and Dad's behavior. That interpretation wasn't wrong, but there are other reasonable interpretations of the same childhood events that you just didn't think of as a child. So let's ask each of your friends for another alternative interpretation. One friend might well say, Mom and Dad were preoccupied with things they had to get done. It had nothing at all to do with your importance. Couldn't this interpretation explain your childhood events just as well as your interpretation, I'm not important? Now here's what your second friend says after watching the video of your childhood. Mom and Dad thought you weren't important, but were just plain wrong. Isn't this interpretation just as good as the interpretation you came up with, I'm not important? Here's a third possible interpretation of your childhood events that one of your friends suggests. Maybe you weren't important as a child, but that doesn't mean you'll never be important. Couldn't this interpretation explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation, that I'm not important? You see, your childhood interactions with your parents could have lots of meanings. Here's one your fourth friend suggests. Your parents just lacked advanced parenting knowledge and skills, so they didn't realize the effect of their behavior on you. If they'd taken a parenting course, they might have been able to show you that you were important, even when they couldn't be available. Friend 1 has another suggestion. Just because you weren't treated as if you're important doesn't mean you weren't important. Couldn't any one of these interpretations explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation that I'm not important? Of course they can. So do you accept that I'm not important is not a fact? It's not the truth, but just a truth? Merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of earlier events? Let me repeat the question, and please make sure you answer out loud. Does I'm not important now seem like it's not the truth, but just a truth? Another way of saying this is, do you get that this belief is just one interpretation of many possible interpretations of the events we discussed earlier? Feel free to pause the program so you can read over the interpretations if you like. With a little help from me and from your friends, it's now clear that your inability to get your parents' attention when you wanted it could have at least 5 different reasonable interpretations or meanings. Do you remember what you wrote down a few minutes ago as the source of your belief, I'm not important? Look at the text box below your screen. Right now, imagine seeing what you saw then and hearing what you heard then. Take a few moments and really imagine the events of your childhood that led to the formation of the belief I'm not important. Didn't it seem when you were a child as if you could actually see I'm not important in those early events with your parents? It did, didn't it? You may have the sense that you didn't see the belief, you felt it. Once you formed the belief I'm not important, you probably did feel it. I'll say more about the feeling in a minute, but what I'd like you to focus on now is not the feeling, but on my question. Didn't it seem as if you could see I'm not important? As if we're out there in the world? Here's why we usually think we can see our beliefs. What happened was that you looked at events that could have had many different meanings and chose one, which was I'm not important. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw Mom and Dad's behavior, it was as if you could see that meaning in their behavior. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events. You attributed the meaning to the events. They had no meaning before you gave them one. Look at the lemon on the screen. Can you see the lemon without seeing the yellow? No, the color is inseparable from the actual object. You can't see one without seeing the other. Even imagining the lemon will cause you to imagine the color yellow. It's the same thing when you attribute a meaning to an event. Once you do, seeing the event is the same as seeing its meaning for you. Right now, imagine being a little kid and seeing mom and dad's behavior and expression and hearing their words and tone of voice. As you imagine it right now, as a little child, doesn't it seem as if you can see I'm not important? It does, doesn't it? But did you really see I'm not important? Before you answer, here's what I mean by seeing something. You can see the computer you're using now, right? What color is it? What shape is it? Where is it? Isn't it true that anything you can see can be described by shape, color, and location? You answered yes out loud, didn't you? Well then, what did I'm not important look like when you were a child? What color was it? What shape was it? Where was it? Did you ever really see I'm not important? Yes, I know, one or both of your parents weren't around a lot of the time, or you had a hard time getting their full attention when they were around. Anyone would have seen that. But you just realized that what you saw and heard could have many different meanings in addition to the one you gave the events, which was, I'm not important. You may respond, Mom and Dad said you're not very important. I heard them say it. You may have heard them say it, but you never heard that it was true. One interpretation of their statement is that they're right. Another interpretation is they're wrong. It's clear that anything you can really see, like a person or an object, can be physically described. So if you can't physically describe what I'm important looks like, is it clear now that you never really saw it? Now, if you never really saw I'm not important, what did you see? Imagine being a little kid again and tell me what you're seeing right now. Is it clear that all you really saw was one or both of your parents not being around a lot of the time, or you had a hard time getting their full attention when they were around? In other words, all you really saw was a series of events, right? I heard you say yes, didn't I? Remember what I pointed out a few minutes ago. What happened was that you looked at a series of events that can be interpreted in many different ways. You gave the events one meaning, which was I'm not important. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw Mom and Dad's behavior, it was as if you could see that meaning in their behavior. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events, you attributed the meaning to the events. Can you get that they had no meaning before you gave them one? I'm going to make a very important distinction between consequences and meaning. There clearly were consequences to your parents' behavior. You didn't get to spend as much time with your parents as you wanted, or you were frustrated because they didn't seem to listen to you. Those were unpleasant consequences. But was there any meaning to their behavior? Let me explain what I mean by meaning. Imagine you're in a room and someone you know comes in and doesn't speak to you. What might you automatically think? For example, you might have just said, they're mad at me, or they're being rude, or they had something on their mind and didn't notice me. Notice, however, that whatever you just said is the meaning you gave to the event. And where did the meaning you just gave their behavior come from? That's right, your mind. Meaning is in your mind, yes? So if meaning is in your mind, is there any meaning inherent in your parents' behavior? Or in any other events for that matter? Of course, the answer is no. So it's not that what happened to you as a child didn't matter. It just has no meaning. Is it real now that the events had no meaning until you attributed one to them? Here's another way to understand that events have no inherent meaning. When I say that, I'm saying that you don't know anything for sure about you, about other people, or about life as a result of these experiences. What do I know for sure about your importance from knowing how your parents treated you when you were a child? Nothing. And if I don't know anything, then you don't either. Now finally, if you never saw I'm not important out there in the world, where has it been all these years? Did I hear you say that I'm not important has only ever existed in your mind? That you never did see it out there in the world? That's right. Now, if the belief is more real to you as a feeling than as a concept, if it seems as if your parents' words and behavior didn't lead you to see your belief, but rather to feel your belief, here's another way to look at it. Didn't it seem as if your parents' behavior when you were a child made you feel that I'm not important? It did, didn't it? I'd like to suggest, however, that their behavior couldn't have made you feel I'm not important, because as you just acknowledged, the events had no meaning. And meaningless events can't make you feel anything, can they? Let's use an analogy to make this totally clear. If you're sitting in your room reading a book or watching TV with no intention of going out, and it starts raining, what do you probably feel about the rain? Answer out loud, please. Probably nothing. The rain's not causing you to feel anything. Now imagine you're a farmer whose crops haven't had water for weeks and are now being saved by the rain. In this situation, how does the rain make you feel? It seems as if the rain makes you feel good. Well, now let's imagine you're about to have an outdoor wedding and everyone's getting soaked. How does the rain make you feel now? It seems as if the rain makes you feel bad. But is it really the rain that's making you feel good or bad? Or is it the meaning you're giving the rain? The rain itself has no meaning and can't produce any feelings. But give the rain one meaning and you feel good. Give it another meaning and you feel bad. So if mom and dad's behavior had no meaning, it couldn't have made you feel I'm not important. And that leads us to a very important question. What did make you feel that? If you don't have the answer to this question, I'll tell you. You felt that only because that's the meaning you already had given to your parents' behavior. All you know for sure is what actually happened. Either mom or dad weren't around much when you wanted them, or when they were around, you had a hard time getting their attention. Let me help you make this real. Imagine that I had been there when you were a little child, and had shown you the alternative interpretations for your parents' behavior. And after that conversation you concluded, my parents mistakenly thought that if they gave me too much attention, I'll get a big ego. It wasn't because I wasn't important. Now imagine being a little kid, and that after this conversation, mom and dad aren't around much, or they don't give you their full attention when they are. Notice how it feels to be a child who's thinking, my parents mistakenly thought that if they gave me too much attention, I'll get a big ego. It wasn't because I wasn't important. You can use the pause button below to pause the video while you make this childhood scenario more real for yourself. When you're done imagining, press the play button. As you imagine this scene, giving it this other meaning, does it still feel as if your parents' behavior and their comments are making you feel that I'm not important? Probably not. And if you didn't feel I'm not important then, would you feel it now? Again, you probably just answered no out loud. So mom and dad's behavior never caused you to feel I'm not important. That feeling came from your interpretation of their behavior. And since your feelings were not caused by events in reality, they were only the result of the meaning you made up to explain the events, is it real that your feelings tell you nothing about whether or not you're important? Okay. Now take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and then say out loud, I'm not important. Is it the truth? Does it still feel like the truth? You might say, of course I'm not important is not true. How could I possibly think that after going through all this? But I'm not asking if the belief makes logical sense. I'm asking you to look at the statement in the same way you did when you started working on this belief. Does it still feel like I'm not important is true on a gut level? Does the statement feel true? Or do the words feel flat now? Don't forget that we form beliefs to give meaning to events that have no real meaning. Having done that, we then think we observe the meaning in the events out there in the world. It becomes a fact for us. Once we realize that the earlier events never had any real meaning, that the meaning was only in our mind, that it was never a fact, and that the feeling we had was caused by the meaning we gave meaningless events, the belief disappears forever. Take another deep breath, and let it out, and say out loud, I'm not important. Doesn't it feel very different when you say these words now than when you said them at the beginning? Is there any sense of believing this statement at all? Unless the belief is 100% gone, so the words have no emotional meaning for you, you probably still have the belief. Remember, holding a belief is like being pregnant. You either is or you ain't. There's no sort of. The way to know if a belief has been eliminated is not to look at your feelings or thoughts in the past when you did have the belief, or even try to guess how you'll feel in the future. The belief felt true on some level when you started, or you would not have spent time on this program. When you say the words of the belief now, I'm not important, do they still feel true like they did when you started? Or do they sound sort of meaningless? If there's no emotional resonance when you say the words, the belief is gone. It might be difficult to accept that a belief you've lived with for many years can be eliminated in about 30 minutes. And yet that's exactly what's happened tens of thousands of times using the Lefko method. If I'm not important feels true at all, even a little bit, then you probably still have the belief. You probably need to review the last part of the process a second time, because on some level it still seems like you saw your belief. Once it's clear that you never saw I'm not important, the belief will be totally gone. So if this is the case, please click the repeat button to repeat that step of the process. I want to congratulate you. You just eliminated a belief you've been living with for most of your life. Do you know that some people, possibly even you, spend years trying to get rid of a belief, and you just did it in about 30 minutes? Your lack of self-confidence and your concern with the opinion of others won't stop after eliminating only 4 beliefs. Nevertheless, you should be experiencing some changes in your life as a result of eliminating them, such as not worrying as much about making mistakes, less dissatisfaction with yourself, and now feeling less need to do something to make yourself important. But by the time you've eliminated all 19 beliefs and the 4 conditionings in this program, or at least the ones you actually have, you'll be aware of a dramatic shift in your thoughts, feelings, and behavior, especially in your level of self-confidence. I promise. When you complete the next belief, you should see a noticeable reduction in your concern about the opinion of others. In fact, the next belief is one of the most important ones that cause us to worry about what others think about us. You can't eliminate that belief, however, until you've eliminated the ones you've gotten rid of so far. The next belief is, what makes me good enough and important is having people think well of me. If you think you aren't good enough or important, and then conclude what makes you good enough or important is having others think well of you, then you've based your self-esteem on the approval of others. Is it starting to get clear why these first 5 beliefs would cause you to have a lack of self-confidence and be concerned about what others think of you? You'll discover the role of the other beliefs and conditionings in holding you back when you get to them. Before you move on to the next belief, I just want to remind you that you can return to the Who Am I Really process anytime you want. If you like the feeling you had at the end of that process, or you want to be reminded how to view problems in your life so you aren't run by them, visit that program again. You now have a choice. Either click Next Belief and move on to the next belief, or click Who Am I Really and experience anything is possible and that you have no limitations. Or make sure this program is bookmarked and close it. Then make a note to yourself when you plan to return and eliminate some more beliefs.